When the world looks at Africa, it sees resources, it sees markets, it sees strategic value. And that is why global powers are drawn to the continent. China is already there, so is Turkey and the West. But now India is also making its presence felt.
They said Africa couldn't build. They said Africans could only buy, borrow, or beg. They mocked the very idea of African factories, African engineers, and African power. But here's the bitter truth the old world can't swallow. Africa is no longer waiting for permission. While the so-called developed nations drown in bureaucracy and arrogance, Africa is quietly welding its own destiny together, piece by piece, bolt by bolt. And now, with India opening its first ever overseas defense plant, not in Europe or America, but in Morocco, the message couldn't be clearer. Africa is no longer the testing ground. It's the launch pad. So for those who still see Africa as a consumer, brace yourselves. Because what's being built in Berechid isn't just a factory, it's the funeral of every outdated myth ever told about this continent. Let's get into it. They didn't see it coming. Not Washington, not Paris, not even London. The self-appointed gatekeepers of global defense who believed that Africa would always be the marketplace, never the manufacturer. Yet, in a move that rattled the entire military-industrial map, India just planted its flag on African soil, not as a conqueror, but as a builder. The town of Berechid, a quiet industrial zone near Casablanca, Morocco, suddenly found itself at the center of an international story. On a breezy September morning, convoys rolled through streets lined with workers, engineers, and reporters. Then the ribbon was cut and the cameras clicked. India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh stood shoulder to shoulder with Morocco's Minister Delegate for National Defense Abdeltif Laoudi, unveiling what is now being hailed as the largest defense manufacturing facility in North Africa, spanning 20,000 square meters of reinforced ambition. The facility, run by Tata Advanced Systems Limited, TASL, the defense arm of India's industrial giant Tata Group, is the first of its kind outside Asia. But it's not the size that startled global observers. It's the location. Why Morocco? Why Africa? Why now? Those were the questions echoing through diplomatic halls from Brussels to Washington as the first images of armored vehicles under construction began circulating online. Because this isn't just another investment. This is India's first overseas defense plant. And it isn't producing handbags, mobile phones, or cars. It produces weapons, advanced, modular, wheeled armored platforms known as the WAP 8x8, co-developed with India's state-run Defense Research and Development Organization DRDO. These vehicles are built for multi-terrain warfare, designed to protect troops, carry equipment, and withstand explosions. And they're being built not in Pune or Hyderabad, but in Africa. The message landed like a thunderclap. Africa is now part of the global defense supply chain, not as a pawn, but as a partner. For decades, Africa's defense story was written elsewhere, in Parisian boardrooms, in Washington security councils, or in Moscow's trade corridors. The continent bought weapons, but had little control over how they were made, maintained, or priced. A rifle sold to an African soldier came with a silent cost: dependence. Every bullet, every tank part, every software upgrade had to be ordered, approved, and imported. But in Berechid, that script flipped overnight. When the Indian minister declared that the plant had become operational 3 months ahead of schedule, even skeptics had to admit that this was not symbolic diplomacy. This was efficiency, foresight, and commitment. Initial deliveries of WAP vehicles to Morocco's Royal Armed Forces will begin next month, and this is only the first phase. Over time, the plant is set to produce variants for peacekeeping, reconnaissance, and command operations, serving not just Morocco, but the broader African and European markets. It's difficult to overstate the symbolism. For Morocco, the partnership marks a strategic victory, a demonstration that African nations can attract cutting-edge defense manufacturing without Western intermediaries. For India, it's an industrial milestone that redefines what Atmanirbhar Bharat, the self-reliant India campaign, truly means. It's no longer about making in India, it's about making with Africa. But beneath the applause and headlines lies a deeper transformation, one that hints at a coming industrial chain reaction. Because when one nation builds weapons on your soil, others begin to follow. When one country treats you as a collaborator instead of a client, the rest of the world has to rethink its approach. The ripples from this single facility could reshape Africa's defense independence for generations. And that brings us to the next question. Why Morocco? Why did India choose this particular bridge between Africa and Europe to plant its industrial flag? What makes Bereshid the starting point of this quiet revolution, and not Nairobi, Lagos, or Johannesburg? When India chose Morocco, it wasn't choosing geography, it was choosing strategy. The Bereshid factory didn't appear out of nowhere. It was born from a calculation that stretched far beyond maps and markets. To understand why Morocco became the first African nation to host an Indian defense manufacturing plant, you must first understand what Morocco quietly became over the last 2 decades. Africa's most underestimated industrial powerhouse. For years, while Western analysts obsessed over oil-rich Nigeria or tech-driven Kenya, Morocco was quietly building something more powerful than both: infrastructure and credibility. It turned its ports into global trade arteries, its highways into export corridors, and its industrial parks into magnets for international partnerships. The Tangier Med port, for example, is now one of the largest in the Mediterranean, linking Africa to over 180 global ports. From that vantage point, Morocco didn't just sit on the map, it controlled access to the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and the European market. India saw what others missed. The Bereshid plant wasn't about serving just Morocco. It was about placing a foot on the bridge between Africa and Europe. Through Morocco, India could ship its armored vehicles north to Europe, west across the Atlantic, and south to sub-Saharan Africa, all without crossing unfriendly logistical or political borders. That alone made Morocco the perfect launchpad. But geography was only half the equation. The other half was trust. Morocco's political environment is stable, predictable, and diplomatically agile, a rare combination in today's world. Its monarchy, under King Mohammed VI, has prioritized modernization and industrial diversification. When other countries debated policies, Morocco executed them. That's why Renault, PSA Peugeot, and Boeing all built plants there years before Tata ever arrived. The nation built a reputation for delivering on time, maintaining security, and offering skilled labor. India's defense ministry and Tata Advanced Systems didn't need a country full of speeches. They needed a country that could deliver contracts, and Morocco was that country. There's also the diplomatic angle. Morocco and India share something deeper than trade. They share a non-alignment heritage. Both nations resisted falling into Cold War blocs, and both have used diplomacy to carve out independent foreign policies. This made the collaboration politically comfortable. There were no ideological hurdles, no Western oversight, and no need to appease anyone's strategic interests. In essence, India's partnership with Morocco is not a marriage of convenience. It's a union of independence. Yet Morocco wasn't chosen merely for what it is, but for what it represents: the new Africa. The Africa that trades horizontally instead of vertically, the Africa that negotiates as a bloc, not as individual aid seekers. The Bereshid Project is an emblem of this evolution, where African states are not asking for defense support, they're co-developing it. And this is where Morocco truly stands apart. It has a government that understands that industrialization is the new sovereignty. It invested in technical schools to train engineers, it reformed its banking systems to attract foreign investment, and it created a transparent legal framework for joint ventures. That's not luck, that's policy. India didn't need to build a factory in a country rich in natural resources. It needed one rich in discipline and ambition. Morocco offered exactly that. But this partnership also gives something Africa has long craved: access to defense technology that isn't wrapped in colonial contracts or Western political lectures. The Bereshid facility will transfer knowledge, train technicians, and build local capacity that no European defense deal ever promised. For Morocco, it's not just about armored vehicles, it's about technological dignity. For India, it's about proving that partnerships based on equality can outperform those built on dependency. Still, every revolution starts with a tool, and in Morocco's case, that tool has 8 wheels, modular armor, and an Indian heart. The next chapter of this story isn't about the country anymore, it's about the machine that's coming out of its soil. Because to grasp the full power of this collaboration, we must look at what's actually being built inside the plant: the WAP 8x8, the symbol of a new defense era made by the South, for the South. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. So what exactly is rolling off the assembly lines in Bereshit? What kind of machine is powerful enough to make the world turn its head toward Africa's first Indian-built defense factory? It's called the WAP 8x8, the Wheeled Armored Platform. And it's not just a vehicle, it's a statement of intent. Every bolt and sensor inside that steel giant tells the same story. Africa will no longer fight with borrowed tools. The WAP 8x8 was co-engineered by India's Defense Research and Development Organization DRDO and Tata Advanced Systems. But what makes it extraordinary isn't just its Indian DNA. It's the fact that it was designed for real-world conflict zones, not sterile showrooms. This machine is purpose-built for terrain that doesn't forgive mistakes, deserts, jungles, mountains, and marshes, the very terrains that define Africa. The WAP is a multi-role modular vehicle, a revolutionary concept in modern warfare. In traditional systems, armies buy separate vehicles for transport, command, reconnaissance, and medical evacuation. The WAP does all of that and more. In just a few hours, the same chassis can transform from a troop carrier to a reconnaissance vehicle, a mortar carrier, a mobile command unit, or even an armored ambulance. That means African militaries can adapt in real time without waiting for foreign parts or permissions. Technically, it's a masterpiece of versatility. The WAP runs on an 8x8 drive, powered by a 600 horsepower Cummins diesel engine that gives it the power to push through mud, sand, and rocky terrain at speeds up to 100 kilometers per hour. It's protected by modular composite armor, scalable to different levels of ballistic resistance. Its V-shaped monocoque hull absorbs blasts from landmines and IEDs, a critical feature for regions facing asymmetric warfare. But what truly sets it apart is not what's under the hood, it's what it represents: autonomy. African armies have long faced the same frustrating dilemma: importing hardware that can't survive their climates, can't be repaired locally, and can't adapt to local warfare needs. When something breaks, the wait for spare parts from Europe or America could stretch months. With the WAP, that era begins to end. Every component of the WAP is designed with local adaptability in mind. Engineers in Morocco aren't just assembling, they're learning the systems, mastering the blueprints, and localizing production. Already, 35% of the WAP's parts will be sourced from within Morocco, and that share is set to rise to 50%. That's not outsourcing, that's integration. And this is where the silent revolution lies. When a continent begins producing the vehicles that defend it, it starts rewriting the psychology of power. It's no longer dependent on others to secure its borders or maintain its sovereignty. The WAP 8x8, built in Bereshit, is Africa's first step towards self-sufficient warfare technology, a future where African soldiers drive vehicles assembled by African engineers using African steel. But beyond engineering, there's an ideological transformation at work. The WAP is the physical embodiment of a South-South defense doctrine, nations of the global South collaborating to defend themselves without needing approval from the North. It's a machine born from cooperation, not coercion, from shared ambition, not shared dependence. And make no mistake, the implications extend far beyond Morocco. The production of the WAP could evolve into a platform for Pan-African defense collaboration, where nations from the Sahel to the Horn of Africa share knowledge, production lines, and upgrades. For the first time, Africa could standardize parts and maintenance systems across multiple armies, creating a unified industrial front that foreign suppliers can't easily manipulate. The plant also symbolizes something human: skills transfer. Hundreds of Moroccan technicians and engineers are being trained by Indian specialists in everything from welding precision hulls to coding digital control systems. These aren't short-term jobs, they're long-term capabilities. Once those skills exist, they spread across sectors, across borders, and across generations. Still, the WAP's emergence raises a much larger question. What does this mean for Africa's position in the global defense order? How will the old powers react when the continent begins manufacturing its own military assets, no longer asking for their protection or their overpriced equipment? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. When the first photographs of the WAP 8x8 being assembled in Morocco hit international defense circles, something shifted, quietly, but decisively. Western analysts didn't say it out loud, but they understood what it meant. Africa had just entered the global arms race on its own terms. The WAP wasn't simply a military product, it was a political earthquake. For decades, the global arms market treated Africa as a dependent consumer base, a place to sell weapons, not to build them. The rules were written in Western capitals, enforced by Western banks, and justified through Western think tanks. The idea that Africa might begin to manufacture and export defense systems, with technology shared, not dictated, simply didn't fit that narrative. But with India's arrival, that narrative is cracking. And this isn't just about one factory. It's about the symbolism of what happens when a non-Western power invests in Africa's ability to defend itself. To the West, that's unsettling. Because control isn't just held through politics, it's held through dependency. If Africa can make its own vehicles, repair its own fleets, and train its own engineers, it doesn't need the aid that used to come wrapped in conditions. It doesn't need the second-hand promises of NATO or the surveillance deals masquerading as security. India's model presents a quiet rebellion against that. It offers something that the global North has always resisted: defense without domination. The Barachid plant stands as proof that Africa can industrialize without surrendering its autonomy, and that's exactly what makes it revolutionary. While European media frames it as India expanding its global reach, the reality on the ground is different. This is Africa expanding its choices. It's no coincidence that Morocco, Ghana, Kenya, and Egypt have all been strengthening ties with India, Turkey, and China simultaneously, forming what some analysts are calling the new security triangle of the global South. This is where the story deepens. Africa's pivot toward diversified defense partners doesn't just change trade flows, it changes power dynamics. The continent is no longer a passive zone of military contracts, but an active participant shaping global strategy. The world's old empires can no longer dictate who supplies Africa's armies or who trains them, or what humanitarian clauses they must sign in return. Take peacekeeping, for instance. For years, Western donors funded African missions but controlled the hardware, logistics, and even the decision-making. With local production on the rise, beginning with Morocco's plant, that model starts to crumble. Africa can now equip its own peacekeeping forces, repair its own vehicles and regional facilities, and define its own security priorities instead of renting them. But there's another dimension: industrial psychology. When African youth see tanks, drones, or aircraft being built in Africa, it changes how they imagine their future. Defense factories are not just about weapons, they are institutions of confidence. They say, "We can build what others said we couldn't." That's how civilizations rise, not through slogans, but through the power to manufacture what they once imported. And the ripples are already visible. European and American defense companies are now re-evaluating their African strategies. Washington's AFRICOM has quietly expanded its monitoring of industrial cooperation between African states and Asian partners. French defense contractors, long entrenched in Francophone Africa, are seeing their influence erode as countries like Mali, Niger, and now Morocco diversify their military supply lines. But India's entry is especially significant because it doesn't bring a colonial past, it brings a shared struggle. It's a nation that once stood against imperialism, now standing beside a continent that lived through it. This emotional symmetry is reshaping alliances faster than any trade deal ever could. Still, this moment is not just about politics, it's about possibility. Because if a single factory in Morocco can jolt global powers into attention, imagine what happens when more such plants rise across the continent. Imagine if Ghana produces its own radar systems, Kenya assembles drones, and Nigeria manufactures armored personnel carriers. The entire architecture of global power begins to tilt. And that's precisely where this story heads next. Because what's emerging from Morocco isn't just a defense partnership, it's the seed of an African manufacturing revolution. A revolution that could spread, factory by factory, until Africa no longer fights to be included in the world order, and it becomes the place where that order is built. It's about who controls tomorrow's weapons, tomorrow's technology, and tomorrow's narrative of power. The West built its empires by controlling two things: resources and defense. For centuries, Africa had the first but not the second. It mined gold, cobalt, uranium, and diamonds, but someone else always forged the weapons those materials produced. The irony is as bitter as it is poetic. The continent that provided the raw materials for global wars could never defend itself with its own hands. Until now. India's facility in Morocco isn't merely a manufacturing site. It's the first proof of concept for Africa's long-suppressed military industrialization. Once Morocco starts rolling out the WHAPS next month, it sends a signal across the continent that industrial sovereignty is possible without Western blessing. And once that door opens, others will walk through it. Already, Ghana has expressed interest in co-developing light armored vehicles with Indian partners. Kenya, with its growing drone sector, is exploring the integration of Indian surveillance systems. Egypt, which already hosts local arms assembly, has invited new partners to move from assembling parts to building systems. Slowly, a new map is emerging, not of colonized supply lines, but of African production corridors. But there's a deeper transformation at play here, one that isn't measured in units or export figures. It's a psychological renaissance. The Berechid model teaches Africa that it can rewrite its place in the global hierarchy without waiting for the approval of defense donors. It can design, test, and build within its own borders. That changes how nations negotiate, how they invest, and how they define independence. For decades, Africa's development narrative revolved around agriculture, tourism, and minerals. Rarely did anyone speak of defense as an industrial opportunity. It was treated as taboo, as if Africa's security was something that had to be outsourced for its own good. The Berechid facility obliterates that taboo. It proves that the defense industry, when built transparently and locally, can create skilled jobs, strengthen research institutions, and inspire technical innovation that spills into other sectors, from logistics to robotics. And it's not lost on Africa's youth. Across universities in Dakar, Nairobi, and Accra, young engineers and coders are paying attention. They're watching how a partnership born between India and Morocco is building not just vehicles, but confidence. In a world where drone warfare, cybersecurity, and AI are rewriting the rules of conflict, Africa's participation in the creation of technology, rather than just its consumption, is revolutionary. Yet, the old powers won't give up their influence quietly. Western military contractors are already lobbying African governments to stick with trusted suppliers. Financial institutions are quietly warning about dual-use technology risks. It's the same language used for decades to keep Africa dependent, to ensure that every tank came with a loan and every bullet came with a bill. But Africa's new generation of leaders, from Ouagadougou to Rabat, are not so easily swayed. They've seen what dependence costs: sovereignty, policy freedom, and dignity. The new partnerships forming, with India, Turkey, China, and South-South allies, are not about replacing one master with another. They're about removing the concept of masters altogether. That's the quiet revolution taking place behind the clang of steel in Morocco. It's not about competing with Western arms giants. It's about creating an African ecosystem that doesn't need their validation. When African engineers design, African technicians assemble, and African soldiers deploy, that's more than self-reliance. That's reclamation. And the beauty of it is that this transformation won't stop at defense. Once Africa proves it can industrialize the most complex, regulated, and capital-intensive sector of all, military technology, it will gain the confidence to industrialize everything else. Aviation, space, energy, the domino effect has already begun. So, as the first WAP 8x8 ES roll out of Berechid under the African sun, they represent far more than military vehicles. They represent redemption, the long-delayed merging of African talent, resources, and purpose into one unstoppable force. The world may still dismiss it as symbolic, but every empire, every industrial power, and every revolution started with something symbolic until it wasn't. And perhaps one day, when history looks back at the dawn of Africa's industrial century, it will trace its origins not to a Western bank loan, not to a foreign base, but to the hum of machinery in a Moroccan factory, where the continent finally decided to arm its own destiny. Do you think Africa's defense revolution in Morocco is the first real step toward total independence from Western control? Let us know in the comment section. Could this partnership between India and Africa become the blueprint for a new global power balance? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.